Welcome everyone to joining our event, which will be known as Baltic Biomass Market. We have Vaidas Jonutis with us in studio, our Baltpool head of the commerce, and Tomas Jovdas, the head of commerce. Hello. First, a few words in advance. We'll have a guest from abroad, Ervis Enderman from Argus Media. We'll be talking about the Baltic market, and she will be talking about Europe and European review, European trends. Additional information for everyone who's joining us, since we have guests from abroad, this event is interpreted, and you can use the interpretation by pushing a button on Zoom window on the button of world, and you can choose an option in which language to listen, in English or in Lithuanian. Also, throughout the event, you can pose questions to us. You can do that through slide program by choosing the Baltpool channel. So please ask the questions at any time. If you see a slide which was interesting to you, and we'll be reading those questions throughout the presentation. And I would like to invite our head of commerce, Vaidas Jonutis, to begin this event, and he'll be talking about the Baltic markets, about the heating season, and about the insights after it. And after, we'll invite our guests from abroad.
1 second, please. For those who do not speak Lithuanian and who didn't understand our language, there is options to choose the language in the Zoom.
In the Zoom window, there is an icon of the globe where you can choose the preferred language of the interpretation. So just click on English language and all the presentation will be translated simultaneously.
Yes, stay with us.
Yeah. Sveiki, kolegos.
So I'll begin. Hello, colleagues. And so this event usually took place after the heating season, but seeing what is happening outside, it seems like we'll restart the heating season once again, because it seems like the temperature, because of the climate change, is changing many times throughout the season. So, Thomas, you interrupted me. If you have anything to add, please say it online at the moment when I'm speaking, because this is not a president's election. We are not as frozen by our obligations to maintain our speech. Yes, that's why I interrupted you. Just like in Eurovision, we're talking in Lithuanian, so here we're talking as well. So I'll begin with saying that the presentation will come in 4 pieces. At the first segment, I would like to speak of how could we compare the Baltic states. The data that we managed to collect has less views, because in other states it's more difficult to collect data about the prices of biomass and heating prices. So we'll try to compare our 3 states. So this will be the first part. The second part will be about, well, the fact that comes once again to our attention is that biomass is becoming similar to all the other raw materials. So I would like to talk about the theory related with raw material cycles. And the third segment will be about a forecast for this year. And the last one is about the RED 3 directive, which will come out in a year from today. And we'll have a change in regulations, but it shouldn't be too significant. It won't affect the markets too much. So, first of all, the heating tariffs for the consumers in the Baltic states. If we compare the last two seasons, one of which was very expensive and the next one which followed this year. So we see the fact that in Latvia, the heating prices went down the most. In Lithuania, it went down by 16%. In Estonia, it went down by 9%. While in Latvia, it went down by 30%. This graph on the left side on 11 o'clock, we see the levels of tariffs in different states. Of course, that's affected by the fuel prices. Last year, it was also affected by the purchases of natural gas. And thinking that only biomass affected the heating prices is not correct. But this year, the influence of those changes was far lesser because the gas market was much more stable. And so we see that the heating prices in Latvia and Estonia were very similar. In Lithuania, they were lower. In fact, I didn't even see how much smaller it was. But everyone can take that into account by looking at their own market. So since we are from biomass market, I would like to talk about the fact that rather how the heating price reacted differently to the price of biomass. So the Latvian graph seems the most ideal because both the biomass and the heating went down in price by 30%. We took the prices for all these graphs from Baltpool. So in Lithuania is very representative, in Latvia less so because the liquidity is lower than in Lithuania. In Estonia, even lower liquidity of ours, but we still can see a common trend. So the fact is that the biomass prices went down in all the countries significantly, least so in Estonia, but it was also significant. Estonia was unique because the prices went up before less. So in Lithuania, the prices went down by 40%, so the most. And looking historically at the changes of biomass prices, the heating prices for the population goes down by half the percentage value, which is reflected in biomass price. So Latvia showed a different trend. Both the biomass and the heat went down by the same percentage point. We would think that's related with regulation. Maybe last year the price was too high. Well, why would I say that? For example, in Lithuania last year, there was no such trend that the price of biomass would be transferred to the heating tariff. So the heating companies potentially took part of the price increase and compensated it from their profits. So it might be related with some regulatory requirements, but the general trend is that the reduction of biomass price made it easier for the people throughout the winter. And here we see the correlation of biomass and firewood prices. And we see how the trends develop in these two related markets. But we can also look whether these trends are identical or not. So what are the trends that we see? First of all, we see that the firewood and the price of biomass can be compared, and quite strongly, because the firewood is usually the most expensive class of raw materials participating in the biomass market. It forms the price of that, the last price of watt hour. So here we see the numbers where the firewood is declared by the National Forestry Agency, and biomass price is taken from the Baltpool platform. So the trends were surprising, but they're identical. The fall of price of biomass is faster than that of the firewood. And that is probably related with the fact that the national forests in all the Baltic states have long-term contracts, and the producers of biomass have to fulfill those contracts. And so when we move from the more expensive year to the cheaper year, the period of high price lingers. And it seems like biomass price is falling, but the firewood price retained its height for some time. Now the trends are very similar, the prices are very similar as well. Nevertheless, that lingering effect is coming from the fact that part of the firewood price is frozen by the long-term contracts. I would like to add a different comment. Actually, the delay of firewood price fall comes from the fact that the suppliers who finished the last season very well did not reduce the demand of firewood, but the biomass demand went down. So these are also correlated facts. Well, yes. Since this graph is from the year 2022, and then we reached the peak of biomass in the end of the 2022. Well, I would like to draw the attention to the fact that the trend is almost identical in all the Baltic states. It's not that looking at the numbers in Finland or in Sweden, you would see different trends. So the Baltic state situation is similar.
These are the same numbers as I've showed you before, but the only difference is that they are overlapping in the same graph. Firewood and firewood prices in Baltics, in the three Baltic states, the price fluctuation trends are similar, but the general level differs. The cheapest country is Estonia, followed by Lithuania and Latvia in terms of firewood prices. However, having in mind that in Latvia, firewood and wood in general is sold together with the delivery costs, I think that locals will be more aware of the actual price differences. But what is clear is that the trend is directed towards the same level that is being shaped in these last few days. And when it comes to biomass, the situation is very similar because, as I have just mentioned, these are very much connecting areas. Countries can start transporting to one from another in the spot market circumstances. So in this case, opportunities for an arbitrage among the countries when prices are lower in some states and higher in others. So the possibilities are decreasing all the time. For the general understanding what is going on in the three Baltic countries in terms of export and local production, well, a clear leader in this area is Latvia. Its export is the largest as compared to other countries. And if we looked at all these countries together, in Latvia, Latvia exports more than Estonia and Lithuania combined. Well, of course, Lithuanian exports are pretty low compared to local consumption. In Estonia, due to lower installations, this distribution is half and half, more or less. But the fact is that the market bubbles or boils the most in Latvia since it's the largest market. Buyers in Latvia have to compete with export market, and it can be said that in Latvia, installed power in the harbor is twice or three times than the actual boilers. Of course, it's probably related to the number of ports in the country, because in Lithuania we only have one port city or one harbor, and our exports are only 6%, 6%, whereas in other countries they export more than a half. Yes, they have more harbors, more forests, fewer restrictions on forest activities, so their possibilities are different. And we have the first question on Slido related to the previous slide about the biomass prices. So the question is whether the indicated biomass price is actual or that of contracts or transactions. These are all biomass products average supply price. I mean supply, this is an important thing. Now, when it comes to strategies, we tend to emphasize the differences in strategies, the fact that they cause additional risks when playing in the market. And in some cases, for example, this year in the city of Vilnius, the price differences in the heating market among different players of this market was 5 to 6 euros, meaning the price the boiler operators pay, even though they participate in the same market. And we tend to emphasize the benefits of diversification among short-term and long-term transactions or deals. And this year we also would like to show some statistics to show how important it is to diversify and just to have an average price. Because, well, in this slide, when it comes to Estonia, I cannot really say anything because Estonian market in Baltpool is exceptionally oriented towards short-term transactions, just like Latvia. And this similar trend is noticed in Lithuania as well. The green line that shows the average price that the buyer or purchaser paid. It is the highest where long-term deals dominate, the blue color, and the purple price is short-term deals, so the prices are much lower. The same trend is noticed in Lithuania as well. Long-term deals are mostly focused on the left of the graph, and I wanted to emphasize two particular prices, meaning 25.76 on the left and 19.98 on the right. So, as I mentioned, this is the same Vilnius heating supply system, and market players had contracts with such differences in the same market. And these 5 or nearly 60 euros result in huge price differences. So one player managed to profit much more than the other, saying that those that paid 19.98 thought everything through. Well, it can be said like that. You can state this after the fact, right? Yes, yes, retrospectively, with the power of hindsight. Yes, the people who have the power of hindsight, of course, are the smartest. But I know, Thomas, I think you like to repeat this phrase that, well, when it comes to average prices, as you've said, the best thing is to be an average player in the markets, to have this average amount, which poses the fewest risks in business. And we have a few more questions. I would like to remind you that please ask your questions on slido.com or through Slido app on the Baltpool channel. So the first question is about Vilnius and prices. Maybe the prices differ because all the boilers calculate the prices, including the price of delivery, and one boiler pays for the delivery itself. Okay, I think you mean the Vilnius CHP, combined heat and power plant. And I know the figures that I've shown do not include this power plant. And even though you mentioned this in your question, no, this is not the case. These are two regular day-to-day market players. And this would not have disrupted the amounts. The average of the train carriages that the CHP power plant paid for does not have an impact. Well, it does have some impact, but I think that's fewer than a couple of percent for biomass, so it's not a significant difference. And another question is, in what price level biomass transactions are fixed right now? How do they differ from last year? And what could be the forecasts on the upcoming season's trends? That's a great question. Towards the end of the presentation, we are going to talk about this. But yeah, we're going to mention this a bit later, but we will answer this surely. Now, when it comes to sellers, let's come back one slide. Maybe those who don't know about the Estonian context. So in our exchange, one huge market player from Estonia and a power generation player dominates the market. So that is why they only deal in short-term deals, because electricity prices change and they do not take the risk of long-term contracts. Well, this is related to the internal risks of the market. Having in mind that the electricity prices are very fluctuating, so those who are playing in the electricity market long-term deals for them is an additional risk, which, if they're not successful, will have to be covered using their own profits. So thank you for spotting this. And now when it comes to sellers, Estonia, because of its internal nuances, just like Thomas has just mentioned, they're related to the electricity market. So the long-term contracts are not something the sellers strive for. They have no possibilities for this. So Latvia and Lithuania, in Latvia and Lithuania, the trends are the same. Average prices are paid by those who had an average strategy. Let's put it this way. Now, how should we assess those who are on one side or another of this graph? Of course, this year, players on the left are happier, and for 2 years in a row, we have been seeing the same trend. The question is, well, historically, this strategy has been very inconsistent. I don't think we should stick to this strategy, but the fact is that this year there are some companies who worked in a spot regime and some companies that only used long-term contracts. But this extremities, well, they are a gamble in a sense. But sometimes you're lucky. And you need to assess whether this is luck or this has been something you managed to think through. And both in the finance markets and biomass markets, I think that average result is a great result. I'm not sure if these are new trends that we want to be, all of us want to be the best ones, but let's have a look at the risks we take. The average result is a very, very good result, both when you trade in shares and enter into biomass contracts. So don't be afraid of being average. This is very good. Yes, I've just heard your phrase, don't be afraid to be average because this is great. Well, in my view, when you take up risks by being on one side or another, sometimes the risk is disproportionate, and we're going to talk about this in more detail a bit later. But now about the concentration of players. In Estonia and Latvia, we have fewer market participants, fewer sellers. Therefore, their concentration is higher. And in Estonia, 92% of market is owned by top 10 players. In Latvia, that number is 88%. Top 10 players have 88% of the market. The indicators, I would say, are pretty good, especially knowing that we don't have anything to compare with because the latest heating season has been the most active in our history across the foreign states. So we'll be able to share more information once we have more statistics. Why does I think we are fully representing these markets because our market share in Latvia and Estonia is around 30%. So I think that 30% trade, it's something you cannot ignore. It's a representative fact. Yes, I believe you. I have no objections, but I was trying to tell something about the Lithuanian situation. So in Lithuania, I had a look at the top 20 suppliers, largest suppliers. They have 73% of the total market. Top 10 players have around 55% of the total market. And last year, top 20 suppliers had 71% of the market. So I think that the concentration of these players is very similar. I was surprised that the market shares are really similar among the major players, especially among the top 10 players, both last year and this year. we are seeing mostly the same names. In top 20, only four new companies have entered the top 20. Usually the changes would be more dramatic. And this time, only those players who had around 1% of the market left the top 20. They're still playing in the market, but in terms of the fuel they supplied, the situation has changed. But if you want to know your position, just call me. I can share this with you. Maybe you're interested in knowing the size of your business in the context of Lithuania. And if the banking system needs to have certain figures when asking for credit or something, so this. And we have a question for the audience. Does it make sense to buy and
So we have the question
collect
from
biomass
the audience
during
whether it's
summer
worth buying
for the
fuel
upcoming heating season
for the summer, considering
after
the
taking
heating
the
losses?
losses into
That's a
consideration?
good and correct
Well, it's a great
question. We'll be
question. We're
talking
going to
about
talk
that
about this a bit later.
because we decided to dedicate part of the presentation for the biofuel saving of biomass during the summer. Well, it's not quite clear whether it is profitable, but it of course depends on the market as well. So we'll talk about that definitely. I know that we'll take a look at this angle. So, but now the last slide, which is related with the statistics, RED 2 scheme. With this regulation taking power, now we have to fix what was the source of the biomass in the specific states. Latvia and Lithuania participated in this system using Baltpool Red BP platform. There are some differences between these two states, and I'm not sure whether these quantities in this introductory year is very representative. Because at least in Lithuania, you could have done inventorization, which wasn't required. You didn't need to provide source data, biomass source data for those inventorizations. But right now, the situation is that the dominant material is non-forest wood material, which comes not from forests, which are regulated by the laws. Second largest is industrial waste processing, so wood processing residues. In Lithuania, this situation is different. In Lithuania, logging residues are dominating, 42%. The second place goes to the wood, other non-forest wood, which is not regulated by the forestry laws. And taken together, about 65% of the market is made by these two segments. Maybe next year the situation will change because of, as I mentioned, it won't be the first year anymore. And it will be interesting for us to see whether the situation will change and to which side. But the fact is that Red BP scheme and data input to the platform shows, at least for now, that the concept is legitimate. It has a point. This is slightly different than the EU might want. For the monitoring systems. If you come back again, Valdas, I'll try to add the context about the difference between Latvia and Lithuania in logging residues. If Lithuanian Forestry Agency sells the forestry waste as heating source, in Latvia, they sell finished biomass. And so our system does not include their statistics. It might seem that there's still a lot of potential for logging residues, but I couldn't tell you whether that's actually the case. But so due to different forestry strategies in the countries, we see these changes. And Latvian companies sell the biomass through their own auctions, they don't participate in ours. So that's just for the context. Well, the locals always know better. That's the golden phrase. So now, speaking of theory, this year, as never before, we saw that biomass is just another commodity, which could be compared to the oil, cacao, copper, fertilizers. So it's a complete commodity good, yes. So there are some nuances. You can't transport biomass long distances. Nevertheless, the market is still affected by external markets. And the general trend is that it's very similar to the commodities, to other commodities. So the things I'll be talking here about are related to theory. What are the main triggers affecting the commodity markets? So this comes from the textbook, which clearly states that the dynamics of demand, economic conditions, technological advancements, and geopolitical events are the main triggers. So I think that very closely relates with the biomass market, maybe less so with technological advancement, because there was no new, very unique way to extract wood from the forest. But if you look at increase of prices in the past, it affected the market. There was investment to increase the work efficiency. The material producers received profit to modernize their equipment, but all the other triggers are similar. And they also bought vehicles and wood chippers. So that's technological advancement. Well, yeah, you could say so. So the next slide is completely theoretical, but I would like to briefly talk about it. So this graph is named the typical commodity trap. Let's start with the number 1 on the left. So it shows that the supply of the commodity was slowed down, which happened with the closure of Russian-Belarusian borders. So the prices began pricing. The investment into production was increasing. The local supply reaches an adequate level. So the price reaches the peak. And when you see at the number 3, at the third point, we see a supply surplus, the prices begin declining, and the supply surplus causes the price to fall. The production is at a surplus, and the end of the cycle is at the number 4. When the supply becomes more adequate, it's reduced, the prices begin stabilizing, and this bubble of supply explodes, busts. So I ran around the circle. and we saw a similar situation for the last 2 years in the biomass market. So which is the point where we are right now. I would say between the third and fourth point, maybe at the fourth point, possibly. But what is very interesting is that this graph was taken from a guy, a blogger who writes about the oil market. So it seems like oil market is identical to biomass market. I will quote what is written on the right. So the commodity cycle is one of the reasons that companies in this industry are referred to as cyclical companies. And somehow most people involved in these industries forget about a cycle and or ignore it or attempt to exploit it. Ultimately, it is a business that causes a lot of people to become fabulously wealthy or spectacularly broke. So this is an interesting phrase, and it encapsulates what was happening for the last 2 years in the biomass market. So I'd like to reiterate that what was written 10 years ago about the oil market, and it's very accurate. Nevertheless, it is a very good, the cycle was a very good result for our market, for biomass market. Well, your phrase, being an average, is becoming a fundamental phrase for this day's event, and I completely agree with you. So here I would like to specify why where the risk comes from in such a situation. Well, first of all, it comes from the warehouse forming, from the open speculative position. When the supplier invests in forming a warehouse without having a contract for the future sales. And because of that reason, he faces risks that are written about in theory. So the first risk is the price risk. With the price reduction, he starts suffering losses, which is increased by the borrowed capital, which is related with the creation of a warehouse. So if you have your own capital, or rather borrowed capital, any price reduction increases the loss because, well, it multiplies your losses. The second risk is liquidity risk. Market is sometimes too shallow and you can't avoid selling without discounts. We saw this year when in the end of the heating season, the market liquidity began to fall and everyone couldn't realize their products. Another risk is margin call risk. And it comes with the borrowed funds, which sometimes are used in forming warehouses. So the lender can start asking for additional payments. He can start pressuring the borrower to liquidate the position. But those who sell oil definitely face that. I don't know how much it's applicable to biomass market. Another risk is the event risk, risk of natural disasters, which might cause the price fluctuations. Last time, the geopolitical event, the war in Ukraine, had a positive effect on prices and caused a lot of speculation. And the last nuance is related with the psychological risk. This is a completely human point. When the prices start falling, it creates additional psychological pressure to start coming up with decisions which might be irrational. The same applies when the prices start to grow. You start earning a lot, and then you gain too much confidence. You start fearing of losing another opportunity to earn a lot of funds, and that might lead to irrational decisions. And trust me, I'm not talking about a specific case. I just entered this question in ChatGPT, and it pointed out these nuances to me. And it's related with all the types of assets which is liquid, with commodities, with oil, with gold, and so on. But that's pure theory. But wait a bit. Let's not leave another open position. Let's not leave open warehouses. If you take a lot of open contracts without having warehouses, it's also risky. Let's not say that one place is sane, other is risky. It's very good being on the average, not on the edges, to have some contracts and to have some warehouses. That's an excellent idea. You have to have both the contracts and the warehouses. And so, if we look at the next slide,
Now, if we had a look at the next slide, this is open source information about the way business decisions were made in Lithuania in the suppliers, among the suppliers. So just regular statistics related to people, to employment and transport acquisition. While transport is additional capabilities, shredders, transportation equipment. We see clear trends from 2021 to 2023. Among the top 20 suppliers, the number of employees increased by 23%, transportation amount increased by more than 40%. Well, these figures are quite impressive, especially in having in mind the fact that the results in 2023 are very different. You saw this inertia that continued until 2023 when it comes to acquisition of capabilities, but financial results show a different view. Of course, we don't have full results for the year 2023, even though the companies were supposed to publish them, but they are not yet there. So we conclude this from the results of 4 companies that have publicized their results. And those 4 companies show that in the year 2022, as compared to 2021, the turnover of companies increased more than twofold. Profits on the right of this graph increased 3 times. Further years were a bit worse. The turnovers were decreasing, profitability was decreasing to a larger extent, and once we have full results in autumn, we will be able to show what is available from the open source information, but the lower graphs show a different story. It shows that liabilities in balance sheets are only growing, and short-term assets in balance sheets, well, that's mostly related to warehouses, storage facilities. Well, this has been growing as well. From the year 2021 to 2023, both liabilities and short-term assets have been growing. I think that this thing is related to this open position that this year, well, sorry, last calendar year was concluded by participants with huge investment into warehouses, and this explains why prices fell so significantly, starting in December and all the way up to the end of the heating season. If we were to speak in gambling terms, If you win some, then you start trying to guess what number will win. You start believing yourself. Yes, I think you're right. But I think that's a very human thing. Every commodity market faces the very same decisions. Even, let's say, when you advise the beginners who start investing into commodities, well, you advise them that if the year is very successful, the decisions have to be made responsibly. But it's not up to us to tell this, so let's talk about the future. I decided to describe the future by a Danish quantum mechanics genius, Niels Bohr, and he has said that it is difficult to make predictions, especially about the future. But maybe this was the case in the past, before ChatGPT was invented. You've seen our slide related to firewood prices and prices of long-term contracts for the upcoming season. Usually one may wonder from what price level the contracting should begin for the upcoming heating season. Today, in biomass exchange, we have only one long-term contract. It amounts to 22 euros. We have some reserve contracts, but no specific price range. It seems that all the market players are trying to determine the price level for some kind of orientational information. So first piece of orientational information is this graph. I've been following this graph for nearly 9 years, and based on firewood prices, and it now amounts to 38 euros per solid meter. So I think that the start should amount to 22-24 euros for a megawatt hour. I think that would be a fair price in my eyes, looking at this graph. I do admit that this is 30% cheaper than last year's, because last year the long-term contracts were entered into at the price range of 32 euros per megawatt hour, but also it is 25% more than today's spot market. And I have this idea that we are witnessing a war or a fight between the sellers and the buyers. Some hope to see last year's numbers. Others think that a spot market is a good orientational threshold for long-term contracts. I think we should focus on these prices because this trend is usually successful. And we have some questions from the audience. So question number one, why is Baltpool collecting and analyzing financial market participants' data? Well, this analysis was done after I started reading the theory related to commodities trade, and I wanted to make sure whether it applies to Lithuania. And I think that I was able to prove that this trend exists only from the open data. So this is the only reason we were not collecting this information previously. I just asked the services, well, not services, companies that analyze public data. I asked them to send this to me, and they did it. And this is a market assessment in any case. How healthy is the market before the upcoming season? And another question, can we link market players' participation, infrastructure growth for 2023-2024 growth with the expectation that another power plant will start with full capabilities? I think it's a fair question, and I would say yes, because both us and people around us were hoping the start of this power plant earlier, this combined heat and power plant. It has been launched, but during the first year, the power plant is doing test operations, so the fluctuations were very significant. Sometimes it would operate, sometimes it would be shut down. Sometimes we would have 130 trucks per day, next day 0 trucks. So I think these fluctuations will be removed by next year, and this combined power plant's introduction into market will be very significant. But I think we are used to this by now. Also, there's a request to specify, according to current trends, what could we expect next season. When it comes to next season, well, Thomas, maybe you can add something, maybe you will change my opinion. The idea is that, well, I think that long terms should be formed in the level I've mentioned, from 22 to 25 euros, depending on the product's quality. Whereas forecasting spot market, well, if somebody wants to have a ride on this in this market, well, I showed you the slides how risky that is. When it comes to short-term contracts, I think if the market players, if buyers will have a proper long-term contract portfolio before the beginning of the heating season, I think spot market will be more calm, and the price levels would be similar to the previous ones, because I think that biomass prices are reaching their bottom rather than that it is too high. Well, this is my answer. Thomas, maybe you have something else? Well, again, it depends who wants to hear the answer. If somebody wants to win against the market and somebody will do the same, well, there's only one or two winners, or 3 winners, not more. But let's see how many players we have participating. Everyone cannot win, so I'll come back to my previous idea. Average position is great because you face fewer risks. And when somebody asks me, when do I have to enter into a long-term contracts, I would say today, every day. Every day you have to enter into a long-term contracts because then you can catch the average. Vaidas, the 22-25 euros for megawatt hour price is based on a raw firewood price, or you took some other aspects into consideration? Well, actually, this price, for which we have collected the data for nearly 10 years, well, it comes from this graph. This graph, I think, is very successful, and my guess comes, or guesstimate comes from this price. It proved its point a few years ago. I hope it will prove its point this year as well. I don't have any special guesses from the statistics we have today, but what I'm afraid the most is that as prices fall to a very low level, the preparation of raw material may be reduced. And when it is reduced, it is very inertic to launch preparation of a raw material or a commodity. You need at least 6 months, and everyone suffers during these 6 months. So in my eyes, expecting a lower price than this level, well, it may be possible, but I think that would be disadvantageous to the supply side. The supply would be reduced. Another question related to Vilnius combined heat power plant, whether this plant will be able to buy fuel, buy biomass in Latvia for the upcoming heating season. Well, from what we have today, I think that there are not going to be any changes, but I agree with the fact that the discussions, the negotiations are taking place at regulators, at the Ministry of Energy, or National Energy Regulatory Commission. They have signals that some changes are needed, so they may be possible, but these changes, well, their design is not even being considered today. So some things may happen that I'm not even aware of. I think we should ask the power plant. This is the primary source of information, and the power plant's representatives will answer because they do not hide anything.
So let's continue. The last slide is related with philosophical thinking, looking at the forecast of biomass prices. In general, talking about forecasts, I'm of an opinion that people's thoughts are caused by heuristics and bias. Heuristics are stereotypes that people use to come up to a decision for decision making. And generally, people don't do thorough analysis. And biases in this case are the mistakes. When we move away from irrational thinking, we just find some confirmations in our past, some patterns, and we make decisions based on those patterns, even though they might not be correct. So I touched briefly upon theory, and my and Thomas' opinions are similar. We wrote down 4 lines about the last season, what incorrect opinions we had. So the first one was that spot is always lower than long-term contract. So in fact, the last 2 seasons were incorrect. Another was that there is too much supply. So the supplier is the main factor. And biomass price. So the behavior that we are afraid of is that buyers can decide to reduce the number of long-term contracts, because for 2 years in a row, this strategy was correct. To postpone the buys. As I mentioned, to postpone the buys, to participate in a spot market. So that creates a systematic risk in the market and so on. So it might increase the export this year, which is very possible because our market became smaller, cheaper rather, and we have many more external players coming in. Now, the sellers will not want to form warehouses, or those warehouses will be very small. We have a lack of production in the biomass market, and producing biomass for the whole season is impossible in the spot market. So we have to have some backup warehouse to provide the biomass for the whole year. Some of the players might take a risk. They might go to long-term contracts without forming warehouses. That is also a risky strategy because there are no guarantees that spot market will be cheaper for the next year, that the trend will continue. So the general trend, the general conclusion is that because of these incorrect lessons, we might have some systemic risk of having smaller warehouses and dependency on liquid spot market. Spot market is fine as long as we have a controlled amount of it. When it begins dominating the market, we might see a situation where the spot won't be able to fulfill the market demands, or its price will become unreasonable. So Thomas, since you aided in preparing the slides, please comment. So when you were talking, I thought about the vaccination as an allegory. You might not be vaccinated if everyone else is vaccinated. Yes. So I see that the time is moving. I'd like to briefly mention the RED III directive, which is coming to Lithuania, to Latvia and Estonia as well. So all the countries will have to prepare for the RED III directive. So first of all, we see cascading coming with this system. So the states will have to prepare support schemes to ensure that biomass support comes from the highest economic value and environmental value, and it has to go down. So all the wood which is suitable for good production has to be used for that. It could affect the firewood. We don't know where Lithuania will move in this area. Other things are less related. So life extension of the products, reuse, recycling, and the biomass. We'll see that product coming only when it becomes unsuitable for the previous 4 categories. So it's unclear how Lithuania might implement this requirement, but it will be implemented. Another important aspect is that there is a new capacity limit for sustainable biomass installation. Today we have 20 megawatts. It will be 7.5 megawatts in the future. It might not affect the market too much because majority of players already keep up with these standards, but some lower plant boilers might appear in the market. So it shouldn't affect biomass amount in the market too much, because everything above 20 megawatts amounts for 80% of biomass market. So there might be more nuances in Latvia where there are more plants of lower power. So we'll see how that develops. And the last slide that I would like to talk about is that there will be new prohibitions to support. So member states will no longer be permitted to offer direct financial assistance for electricity generated from biomass power plants. And direct financial aid will also be banned. Support for sawn logs, industrial roundwood, and stumps and roots for energy production from those materials. But I don't think that will affect our market too much. We have, in the sense of excess supply of commodities, we might have some changes, but there won't be too much of shake-up for the market. And also, these regulations will be implemented only at 2025. So the next season will mostly last without these regulations. We have several questions. The first is, do you think that BPJ sales are necessary in Latvia? And whether in Latvia without these, Lithuania, whether we're unable to provide full demand? Well, I think that the procurement in Latvia is not related with the fact that suppliers are sufficiently invested in commodities or in equipment. When we participate in international conferences, very often we hear from the largest biomass consumers like Sweden and Denmark. So we hear a lot from them about a strategy and its diversification from suppliers in different states. So Denmark buys biomass in the Baltic states not only because it's cheaper, but also that because when one market collapses because some reasons, they would remain able to transfer their procurement to other state. So I would think that their opinion is very right, that they buy part of their commodities abroad, but they maybe should change the competition principles. So maybe Lithuanian suppliers with auto transport should be able to compete in the same auction as the Latvian suppliers with their railroads. But I think that's a question for the future, and you shouldn't pay too much attention to biomass provided from Latvia because the share of the market is very small as for today. I would put it differently. It's not the supplier diversification, it's biomass market diversification. It's not against the suppliers. In my opinion, if you want to work stably, being of that size, that step is necessary. For us, sometimes it's difficult to understand what is the size of Vilnius CHP. This is the largest installation in the Baltic states and almost the largest plant in the Baltic region. And for such a company, any halt of the supply is very, very serious. And the second question was whether your biomass prices for the long-term contract is founded if the auction has not yet happened. That's very correct. The firewood auction was published this year, today rather, and the graph that I've shown might change. The point 38, which is shown with a dashed line, is leading towards 38, might change in the future. So I'll take a ruler and I'll draw a line to the new point. So I completely agree. If a new price is formed, like 45, then 25 will seem like a small price. I agree completely. So if you think that the price will be 16 euros for megawatt hour, might it fall further? I think that the fall, which is related to SM3 right now, is related with the warehouse realization. I think everyone who's selling for 15 euros is selling at a loss, but that's life. And if you would be able to save biomass, like you collect fertilizers or oil, then I would say don't sell. But right now we don't have that ability. I think that biomass sales at 15 euros is below the production cost. Thank you, Vaidas. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you, Thomas. But please don't leave the studio yet,
because soon we'll have
our own guest. And now I will switch to English.
Switch to English now.
Let me switch to English language because Vaidotas has just finished his presentation and we are moving forward. So today with us is Erisa Senderman, who is editor of Biomass Markets at Argus Media, and she has prepared for us a very interesting presentation about Europe's wood chips market. So Erisa, welcome. Hi, and floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Justina, for the kind presentation. Thank you for the excellent, very interesting analysis, in-depth analysis on the markets and the discussion. It's a pleasure to be here with you presenting on European wood chip market developments. Can I just confirm with you, Justina, if you can see my slides in presentation mode?
Yes, we can see, and
Perfect.
We can proceed. Yes.
Perfect. Thanks very much. So I hope that I will be able to give a very brief update on the most recent developments in European wood chip markets, industrial wood chip markets, with a particular focus in Northwest Europe, and how the trade dynamic has shifted there in the region after the 2022 energy crisis. This is the agenda, so a brief discussion about how prices have developed, how this has translated into changes in trade dynamics, the challenges ahead of us, and some concluding thoughts. Before that, just a few seconds about us. I am the editor of the Argus Biomass Markets Report. It's a weekly publication, and we have price assessments for industrial and residential wood pellets, wood chips, palm kernel shell as well for Asian markets. And we assess both spot and forward markets. We look also at freight and other in-depth analysis for the wider generation complex. And this is the specification table for the industrial wood chips that we assess, and we focus on the wood chips that are primarily delivered to the energy sector rather than the other competing sectors, such as cardboard, pulp, paper, etc. So yeah, just a brief note there so that we know what we are addressing to when we discuss prices. Now let's have a quick look at what has happened to the spot markets. The spot price for industrial wood chips for delivery to Northwest Europe has experienced great volatility in the past 2 years. Inevitably, this has been so not only for chips, but for any other biomass or non-biomass commodity in the energy complex. We see here prices reached record highs during the energy crisis in 2022, and then that was followed by some downside in prices. That trend started in 2023 and has sort of continued. So we see prices maintaining within a certain plus minus level, and we see a slight downside as well so far this year. Now, very briefly, the drivers for this downside after the crisis are unusually warmer winters. So for the second winter in a row, Europe has experienced very mild winters, with the exception of certain cold snaps at certain periods in the Nordics when this also bolstered consumption of biomass, but overall the demand not only for biomass and wood chips, but also the wider generation fuels has been relatively slow. This has also affected stocks, so companies for the second year in a row have entered summer with very high stocks, and unusually so for this year, because we see stocks being near capacity throughout the supply chain. So both suppliers and end users are having a very high amount of inventories through the complex. On the other side, so far this year in particular, but also for most parts of last year, one other challenge that particularly suppliers have faced was but also utilities have faced is weakening power prices. So from the very, very high extreme highs in 2022, prices dropped sharply, and this meant that there needs to be an adjustment period in the market, during which period the margins have been squeezed for utilities and producers alike. There have also been outages, so all of these drivers have affected on the downside. However, on the supply side, we see other different type of situation. Suppliers, producers have been facing with the raw material availability supply shock, particularly following sanctions against Russia and also Belarus. From Belarus, which had been there even before the Ukraine war started. And this has, the tightness in raw materials has affected the whole complex, as I'll discuss in a bit with regards to the trade flows as well. But what it also meant is that there is quite a bit of upside in raw material costs, and yeah, the previous presentation showed that excellently, how the costs have gone up since 2022 and how the markets are trying to adopt. There has been inflationary pressures on the other production costs such as maintenance, labor, etc. as well. So overall, higher production costs faced by producers, and hence this has made them less able to accommodate lower buying interest from the buy side. There have also been harvesting restrictions, particularly in the Nordics, but Baltic Sea basin region overall, and there are of course limitations to storage and phytosanitary requirements for overseas, especially US deliveries, etc. So quite a few constraints there that bring me to the other point that yes, the prices have gone have seen quite some downside in the past since let's say late 2022, beginning of 2023, but the reality is that prices remain significantly above long-term averages that used to range around five in the 5 to 7, let's say, or 6.5 euro per gigajoule, and now the price so far this year has been 9.5 euro per gigajoule, which is off from the record highs in 22, but still significantly higher for the reasons that we mentioned. Another phenomenon that we see related to what I just summed up for the supply resistance is that we have seen at extended periods last year that wood chips switched to a premium over pellets, and then this position was changing in the second half of last year, but we see now that these commodities have started to interact again and switch with each other again. This is quite interesting because typically, if you look at historic trends, wood chip, because it's a less processed material, is typically priced lower compared with pellets. So that's an interesting trend as well there. These are the reasons that have made wood chip prices resilient, which most of which I explained already. On the other hand, for pellets, we have seen extreme downside, particularly in 2023, but also the downside continues so far this year as well. And this is connected again with high stocks, weak demand because of milder weather and outages, and also utilities and suppliers as well trying to sell back term cargoes, washout cargoes into the spot market, which is depressing the spot prices over again. Now, these are the key European consumption and production hubs, which I believe you will be very familiar with, so I won't expand too much on this slide. I've put a chart of top European producers for your interest at the very bottom there, and I'd like to jump straight into how the trade flows have changed given the situation and the conditions in the market. Now, before we look at trade data, I want to to point out something, that the wood chips under the harmonized system categories are divided into two main categories: the coniferous ones and non-coniferous ones. And in the charts that I'm about to present, we will only look at the second category, so 440122 for hardwood chips, which we assume most of that gets delivered to the energy sector, which is what we are assessing. There is no guarantee, of course, that all of these chips under this category will go to energy, but we assume that most of that gets delivered to the energy sector. So let's have a very high up view of what the distribution of top exporters to Europe is. I've provided here 3-year averages as well as previous 2 years. As you can see, for 2023 overall, there is lower exports. Russia has completely disappeared from the picture, of course, because of sanctions, and we see a higher Brazilian and Uruguayan chips being delivered to Europe. We believe that most of that, however, is not delivered to the power, but rather to to the pulp and sector, not to the utilities, but to the pulp and sector, pulp and paper sector mostly. Having said that, we have been hearing in very recently that there is quite a few offers for deliveries of Brazilian and even South African wood chip supplies to Europe. So we see that these suppliers are also looking to opportunities, and offers from these sources have started to become available in the market. On the other hand, this is a view from the top importers. Who are they? Of course, no surprises here. We have Denmark, Finland, Sweden, at the top of the chart. So Northern Europe is one of the largest importing regions. However, we do see some very interesting trends post 2022, and you will see there quite some jump in Danish imports as well as Swedish imports. By contracts, Finnish imports of hardwood chips have dropped. One tiny word about the Finnish statistics. To the best of our knowledge, from information we have received from associations and market participants, most of the Finnish industry, Finnish hardwood chip imports used to be a lot from birch from Russia before the war in Ukraine started, and most of it did not go to energy but to other competing sectors. But let's have a look. Apologies for my lack of my capacities in designing. I hope that this map will help somehow, even though it won't be the most beautiful graphic that you'll see. But what happens after the sanctions? There is quite some sawmilling capacity in Finland that is focused in the border with Russia. And this capacity used to get a lot of raw material, including wood chips or other timber material, or a lot of wood material that would then leave a lot of byproduct of wood chip as well, available for energy suppliers as well. Now that disappeared after the sanctions, and now this region of Finland has started to look to secure more and more supplies from southern and particularly the coastal regions of the country, and therefore has created some pressure there, which in turn, let me use the map, which in turn has created more demand from this region from Sweden. And this overall has resulted in, we have been seeing prices at some point, the price for energy chips in Sweden being even higher than the price for pulp, just because of the very strong demand there for energy, as opposed to other sectors whose end product markets have not been pairing very well. So the demand from these sectors has dropped significantly. That's what's happening, and Sweden has been looking, or let's say Norwegian suppliers have therefore tried to sell even more towards Sweden and Denmark. And on the other hand, let's go a bit more down south, the Baltics, of course, they have a very nice geographic position and have been trying to supply both north and south, or towards central Europe, but there is a two-way arrow there that shows that there is quite some interest, particularly in recent months, for suppliers in Germany and also in Poland, for instance, in Central Europe overall, to try and find a new home for their chips. So there is actually some the situation that Vaidotas just explained for the Baltic markets is actually a phenomenon that is happening everywhere, and there seems to be a situation when there is a lot of supply available, and suppliers are trying to get rid of, to shed off some of their inventories in order to create cash flow and to create more business, so to speak, and open up space for new production. Last but not least, there has been one trend that's been typical in the past couple of years, and that is that the markets have become more closed within their local markets. Particularly, this was like a sort of a natural reaction to what happened after the war started, so the sanctions and the situation with energy supply shock there. But it was very interesting to hear in the previous presentation that actually this will now start to will have to start to change, and we might see more like uh, tendency for these markets to open up again and look to sell products, for instance, towards other regions. Now, this chart is nice in the sense that it shows very clearly what I just pictured in that map there. We see here, of course, a very large jump in Swedish hardwood chip imports. As I mentioned before, this might not all be deliveries to energy sector. However, we think that a big chunk of it is. The key trends that we see here is because there has been much less local supply available in 2023 in Sweden due to harvesting restrictions and lower forest activity. There's been stronger demand for import. On the other hand, end users who had contracted waste wood contracts, they received only a small fraction of those, and they had to go and expand and look more for import supplies. And there has also been Swedish forest companies that wanted to keep the price down on hardwood locally, so they imported because they own a lot of forest operations in the Baltics or in Central Europe, Germany and Poland as well. So all of this together has resulted in this big jump in imports last year, and as you can see there is quite a bit of upside in the Okay, sorry. So there is quite a bit of upside in the imports, mostly from Portugal, Latvia. Um, sorry, mostly from Latvia, Estonia, as well as Portugal. So the charts that I've marked there. I'm very We see a similar trend for Denmark as well. Denmark also overall imported more last year, and also there is more from Brazil now. We don't know where all of this supply has, which sector it has gone, but there is a chance that it might have the utilities might have ramped up their receipts from Brazil. Apologies for my cough, because we know already that Danish utilities have term contracts with Brazilian suppliers, and that maybe has offered some easier opportunities to ramp up Brazilian imports. But we also see here that imports from Germany, the UK, and Latvia also went up. There is also more colors in the bar for 2023, which is equivalent to more diversification of sources for Denmark. And the same diversification trend for Finland as well. I discussed Finland a bit earlier, so I'll move on. And I've put also France in detail here. For your own consideration. But because of time restrictions, I'd like to touch very quickly upon the challenges ahead. Most of these challenges that producers have been facing, they continue to face. And I have to say that the raw material prices have been resistant, as it was shown very clearly in the presentation before. And this has primarily also been because it has taken slower for production to adjust to the sharp drop in demand for wood chips or wood pellets in the market. So the market has yet to see that adjustment process there. And on the other side, with end users, of course, one of the most challenging things to do is to cope with low power price environment versus higher fuel price, relatively higher fuel prices, which would squeeze the margins. And of course, they also have to keep an eye on competing sectors and their demand for feedstock, as well as new demand. I'll discuss that very briefly in the next slide. But let's have a quick look at power prices here. I've compared the spot price averages for the Baltic countries from Nord Pool. And as you can see, the red line shows 2023 prices and the yellow line shows so far this year. By a large contrast to what they were in 2022, record high levels for power markets overall. We see now that the power prices have started to converge towards pre-2022 levels. And this is the reality not only for the Baltic countries, but also for the whole region and overall Europe as well, I would say. In the near term, what might happen for power markets in the Nordics, the power prices are expected to return or to hold very close to their pre-2022 levels. And we can see this expectation from the hedging information that companies, big utilities have announced and told us. And also there is higher nuclear availability in the region because of Sweden's 1.6 gigawatt of oil-free nuclear power plant, which started up in second quarter last year, which will also reduce the need for alternative fuel and technology generation. And of course, gas production is steady. There is very nice flows for LNG, etc. So everything is stable. So the near term seems to be stable and to be much closer to pre-2022 levels, the outlook. Whereas for longer term, it will, of course, depend on how much renewable capacity will develop, how quickly, and also how quickly electrification will realize. There is also quite a few new projects that either have come online or will come very promptly. Of course, in the previous presentation, we heard about the Vilnius CHP that was partially commissioned in December 2023, but there is quite a few other projects as well. For example, in Denmark, Finland, all of the projects that I've listed here. I've included also the competing sectors projects that will have to compete for the same feedstock of wood chips with bioenergy here, such as the Meta's Chemi mill or the Homanit's cardboard factory in Lithuania. But if you look at this, only in Denmark and Lithuania alone, if you take the combined additional consumption, it takes around just over 1 million ton per year of wood chip equivalent consumption. So there is quite some new demand there that probably is also exerting some pressure on the wood chip side. And to conclude very briefly, there has been less forestry activity, particularly in Northern Europe, and less to recovered waste, which has supported import demand, particularly for Denmark and for Sweden as well. The demand drivers are various: new pellet production capacity or other capacity that will need the wood chip feedstock, as well as power market developments. On the other hand, the supply drivers depend on how well the raw material availability and costs will develop for suppliers, which are under constant pressure to keep costs down, and also activity in upstream or downstream sectors and overseas supplies, which seem to be on offer, and they will also put some pressure on European production as well, or supply as well. Near future drivers, of course, there was a discussion about regulation. I've listed it here for your for some food for thought, and power market developments will be key drivers for the close future. Whereas for medium to longer term, we have to consider more involvement in the biomass sphere for hard to abate sectors and BECCS overall. So yeah, I thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Erisa, for the presentation. It was really very interesting. We don't have any questions in Slido, but we have questions from our side because now it's really interesting to discuss in details so important matters to all of us. So, Vaidai, are you ready?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Arisa. So, do you feel personally a slowdown in the industry, in the furniture industry in your country? Meaning that people consumes less, something like that?
Well, it is a luxury good, to be honest. So I wasn't prepared for this actually, and I don't know what the main trend is in the UK right now. But I can tell you my own story. We were planning to do a house extension and to do a lot of woodwork as well with our home. Back in 2022, we're just about to get the mortgage and everything, and that was completely put on hold by the developments back then. So I guess a lot of other people might have felt the same. There is quite a lot of costs have increased significantly. So I'm sure that a lot of other people might have put on hold their plans to do furniture purchases or other.
Okay. Is there any news about these diseases in the forests from in the West Europe or in the North Europe? Is it increasing, decreasing? Is it changing situation?
We keep asking about this, but we haven't so far heard of anything or haven't heard any reports of anything that has been significantly affecting the supply. Our understanding is that from last year, if you're talking about the little spurts of disease from last year, that it was contained, and some areas were close to harvesting even to contain the disease. But yeah, nothing like significant that would affect the supply, to be honest.
Very simple. Could you say about is any in what countries the most popular is linked long-term contracts to your index?
It's most major utilities, but also smaller players, I would say. To the best of my knowledge and our knowledge, they do use Argus in the indexation in some of their term contracts. So yeah, I'm not at liberty to mention any names, but all of the Northwest European utilities, so players in Northwest Europe, the countries that I just discussed in my presentation.
Okay.
Including UK, including Sweden, including Denmark, Northern Nordics, France. Yeah.
Nordic. And I have one question, Arisa. What do you think, how will change import-export routes in biomass with RED II and RED III directive? Do you see any significant changes in material flow?
Understood. So it is a bit early to talk about RED III, to be honest, but I know that the industry has already started to make preparations, but RED II implementation is a fact already, and we're aware that it's being implemented according to the directive already since last year. I think there has been challenges for companies This is also the case with EUDR as well. There are challenges, for example, in the implementation of EUDR for small and large size companies is different. There is a 6-month gap there, which we think might affect the ability of small and larger size players to interact with each other, and it's not ideal in this sense. And similarly, there have been challenges with applying all of the RED II directive, and also because it's a directive, it is not transposed identically in each national legislation. And what this means is that different national legislation can put the bar even higher or keep it lower than compared with others, and there is different level of implementation of the RED II in different countries. So this has this has comprised with some barriers, particularly in the short term when the directive had first started to be implemented. But I don't see any major effect on the markets yet. We are still on a transitionary period because also the main certification schemes have yet to close up everything. So they have started offering the RED II certification system, but it will take 18 months of transition period to close up the whole circle for Europe. So we are yet to see what is going to happen there. But for now, we don't see any major disruptions in trade flows because of that.
Thank you.
Thank you for the questions.
Thank you so much, Erisa, for joining us today, and thank you for the great presentation and your time. Taigi, persijungiu atgal į lietuvių kalbą, nes...
So switching back to Lithuanian, I see that most of us have joined from Lithuania. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for spending, 2 hours with us. As always, I would like to remind you that this show has been recorded, and we'll share the recording in the Baltpool YouTube channel. We'll send you the link via email. Thank you once again. Tomas Vaidas. Thank you all. Thank you, Vaidas, for your presentation. It was easy for me just to add something. So thank you and see you next time.